Good day, and welcome to Lesson 9 and Chapter 5 in our study of the book of Daniel. Before we get into this, it's important to remember, as I mentioned before, that the two main themes of this book are man's obedience and God's sovereignty. There's also another theme, and that is the problems of man's pride. It says in Proverbs 6:17 that there are 6 things that the Lord hates. And the first one mentioned is a proud heart, a proud look, a proud being. And if you read through this book, if you read through these chapters that we've already done, and this chapter in particular, you'll see how much pride plays a part in man's existence and in ultimately man's defeat. Nebuchadnezzar was a king over a vast empire centered on Babylon. And when he was shown this dream that he had by Daniel, and that his kingdom would be a golden kingdom which would be subsequently supplanted by a secondary kingdom, it was his pride that actually caused his own defeat. After Daniel interpreted this dream, Nebuchadnezzar pledged to honor the God of Israel and Daniel's God, but he soon forgot this. And as time went on for the years, he became more and more back to his old ways where he himself was in charge. He was the doer and the begotter of everything. And when he had the second dream, a few years after his first dream, when he had this second dream of a tree growing in the plains of Daria, then Daniel showed him how this was going to be his downfall, how this tree represented himself and how it was cut down, only the stump remained. And there was a period of time in which Nebuchadnezzar could have repented and could have turned from his ways, but he didn't, and for a whole year nothing seemed to happen until he exclaimed, looking over the city of Babylon, this great magnificent edifice that he had made by his own hand and for his own glory. And that's when he became struck down and became like an animal. So all this was past, and at the end of that time, Nebuchadnezzar again praised God, the God of Daniel. Now here we are in chapter 5. Nebuchadnezzar has died, and there has been actually a succession of kings following him, kings who reigned for a very short period of time. There was the king called Marduk who reigned for 4 years. And then he was murdered. And another king who reigned for another 2 years. And he was also killed. One king reigned for only a few months. And there was another king called Nabonidus, who was apparently a king for a period of time, but he was spent most of his time away and spent his last years of his life in captivity by the Persians. And he was co-king with another man called Belshazzar, whose story we are about to read. Belshazzar was a man of great pride and who showed that he himself was the ruler of everything, who thought that he himself was the ruler of everything, beholding to no one. So at this stage of the game, this is about 30 years now after the death of Nebuchadnezzar when this chapter begins. And all that Nebuchadnezzar had done and all that he had apparently proclaimed towards the God of Israel has been forgotten. So Belshazzar is now making a great feast in the city of Babylon, in which he invited thousands of people, of his courtiers and his governors and his overseers to come to this huge feast. Now this is amazing because Babylon at that time was under siege essentially by the king of Persia. But they had so much faith in their own being, in their own city walls, which were extremely well fortified, extremely high, that they felt nothing could happen to them. The river Euphrates ran through the city. They had plenty of gardens and vegetables and food to feed themselves for years. And they felt that Babylon was invincible. So therefore, with the Persian and Median armies surrounding the city, Belshazzar went on this great feast to apparently honor the god Baal, but in effect it became just a drunken party. And they said they brought out the gold vessels which had been taken from Jerusalem at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. He took the gold vessels, the sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem back to Babylon with him when he invaded Jerusalem. And he took them back in part to illustrate that his God was more powerful than the God of the Jewish people. So during this party, Belshazzar took out all these vessels to be used as dinnerware rather than for the holy purpose for which they had been intended. And this is an extreme affront to the Jewish people and to God himself. And it's interesting because 70 or 80 years before this event took place, the prophet Jeremiah had predicted the downfall of Babylon. And if you look at Jeremiah, it said these things in number of verses, 7 details. In Jeremiah 50, verses 1 to 3 and verse 9, it says, a northern nation would conquer them, would conquer the Babylonian people. In chapter 51, verses 11 and 28, it said the nation would be associated with the Medes. This was 70 or so years before the events that we're talking about in chapter 5 of Daniel took place. Also in chapter 51, it says in verses 53 and 58, Babylon was described, even at that time, as a greatly fortified city, which it really was. In chapter 50, verse 24, Babylon would be taken by some kind of a trick or snare. In Jeremiah 51:36, it said her demise would involve the drying up of water. In chapter 51, verse 39, it said this would be accomplished while a great feast was in progress. And in chapter 27, verses 6 to 7, it said when Nebuchadnezzar's grandson was in power. These were the prophecies that Jeremiah had given towards the city of Babylon. Now here we are, one of Nebuchadnezzar's grandsons, Belshazzar, is in power. The city is well fortified. A great feast is taking place. And the golden vessels of the Jewish temple are being used as instruments of dinnerware. So you read through, it says, the same time, during the same party, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote on the wall of the room. Now this room was a huge opening, a huge area, about 70 feet wide and about 170 feet long. And it would accommodate all these thousands of people that were there. And on one of these walls, this finger wrote just 4 words that were to be the downfall of Belshazzar. So he could not interpret these words. This really sobered him up very quickly, sobered the whole group up very quickly. So he called all his astrologers, all the wise men again, are the same people that Nebuchadnezzar had invoked before, who could not do anything to describe or explain what this was. So, according to the urgings of the Queen Mother, or the wife of Nebuchadnezzar, who apparently was still living, she asked them to call Daniel, and so Daniel was taken in again. And Daniel explained this, that this writing really said four things. Three things, I guess. One, that you have been counted and you were missing, and you have been found wanting. You have been weighed and you have been found lacking, and that your country would be divided between you. It would be divided from you and taken from you and divided. This is really what these writings on the writing on the wall was, and it signified the end of Belshazzar's reign. It's where we get the phrase that we often use today, the writing on the wall, which means that something is about to happen. And this is what happened during this time of the feast of Belshazzar in the city of Babylon. Because while this was going on, Darius of Persia and Cyrus of Persia had made a plan to divert the river Euphrates from going through the city of Babylon into a swamp area, into a lake which was nearby. And his soldiers were working on this so that the level of the river dropped sufficiently enough that men could use and fjord the river to get in under the defenses of the city and into Babylon. And this is what happened. This is what happened as a result. People were so drunk, people were so in such revelment that they didn't see what was happening. They didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. And this is not something which is just a story. This is something which has been well documented. It has been well documented in history that this happened, and that this would come about probably as a result of the trick that the Persians had done. The Greek historian Herodotus and Xenophon both tell how it happened, and it's one of the best attested battlefield moments in ancient history. While King Cyrus of Persia was lamenting the size of the walls of Babylon, he noticed the river Euphrates passed under them. When night fell, and the sounds of Belshazzar's feast filled the night air, Cyrus instructed his soldiers to build dams upstream to divert the river's flow away from the city. While Belshazzar partied in the palace, the Persian soldiers watched in wonder as the river bed emptied and exposed a broad and undefended passageway under the wall. By the time the drunken Babylonians knew that their walls had been breached, the battle was over. Xenophon says that the Persian soldiers fell upon them as they were drinking by a blazing fire, and without waiting they dealt with them as with foes. The unbreachable stronghold of Babylon had fallen. The date is well known. The battle is well documented. This actually happened. And it shows the pride that Belshazzar had in his own abilities, in himself, in his ability to do what he wanted to do, rather than what he should be doing, how it led to the defeat of Babylon. This really is the story of the 5th chapter of Daniel. And it really stands today, it really stands as a warning to us today, because we do the same thing. We don't pay attention to what is going on around us. We don't take heed of what is happening around us because we have such innate thoughts that we ourselves are invincible. Everything happens to everyone else and not to ourselves. And we have seen in just the last few years how not being aware, not being well prepared can lead to enemies coming through, one group coming through and causing havoc on another, if we're not prepared for what may happen. So the main reason we will not be prepared for what's going to happen in our lives, as far as God is concerned, is that we have too much pride in what we ourselves can do, or what we think we can do, what we think we're able to do, what we think we're able to accomplish. Solomon was like that to a degree. He tried everything under the sun pretty well that he wanted to do. He tried everything that he wanted to accomplish. He had tried everything that he wanted to investigate or explore. And he ended up at the end of it all saying it is all vanity. It is all meaningless. That the sole purpose of man is to worship and to honor and to follow God. And this is what we ourselves often lose. Nebuchadnezzar, on 3 occasions, said he was going to follow God, and each time he turned away from him at the end. We don't know exactly how his life turned out because it's not really well documented, but obviously whatever happened to him did not fall into his grandson Belshazzar, who turned away, who even apparently did not even know Daniel very well. Daniel, who had been demoted from his position in Nebuchadnezzar's court and in Nebuchadnezzar's circle. He was now probably some kind of minor official, still near the palace, but not in the same league as he had been before. So it shows what can happen, because in that same hour that the feast was on, judgment came by the hand of God. And judgment comes to all of us at one time or another. Sometimes it comes quickly, and sometimes it comes over a long period of time. But there's one thing the Bible tells us, is that we all will at some time face judgment. We will face judgment before God. We are too proud to acknowledge God now and to acknowledge what he can do, and that he is really sovereign over our lives, and it is our duty to obey him and not to make out our own way in this world. If we're too proud to acknowledge that, then sometime judgment will come upon us. This is what this story is about. This is really what it is about, because it shows how the pride of one person and one nation, who were so confident in themselves and in their fortifications and in their ability to defend themselves, they were so proud of this, that they were defeated. The same night they were partying and not paying attention to what was going on around them. Judgment came because of the writing on the wall. The writing will come on the wall for all of us at some time, in some place, and under some circumstance. It is up to us to decide whether our pride is too much to prevent us from following and acknowledging what God wants us to do, wants us to be, and how he wants us to act. So this is the lesson of chapter 5. And it's the end of Belshazzar, who was killed that night. He was slain as he partied. This is the end of Babylon in a sense, because it was now defeated by the Medes and the Persians. And we'll get on to that in the next lesson in chapter 6. So thanks again for watching. I trust this has been of some help, and I hope I'll see you next week as we start chapter 6. Thanks again for watching, and bye for now.